Hello and welcome to Door 44 Studios. My name is Wendy and I'm the wire weaver behind Door 44. I'm so excited that you're here today because I'm kicking off my very first wire jewelry make-along. I'm going to walk you step by step through the process of making a pair of Fleur de Lis earrings just like these. And we're going to go through a series of videos. We'll cover every step of the process of making these, but you can also download a free PDF tutorial. Just look in the description below for that download link. I hope you'll join me for this make-along because it's going to be a lot of fun. Let's make something beautiful. So before we get started actually working on these earrings, I just wanted to give you guys a quick look at my design system. So this is just a sketchbook that I keep on my bench. When I'm working on a new design, I'll sketch out ideas on scrap paper, I'll play around, I'll prototype some stuff with wire. And then once I settle on the design, this is where I sort of just record the essential notes that I need for that particular design. So these are the Fleur de Lis earrings. You can see I just did a really basic sketch. I write down the materials that I used, the basic construction process, very, very basic steps here. I'm just going over, just creating an outline essentially for the tutorial. And then I list all the tools that I use in making this particular design. And that's it. Before I started writing tutorials, this is all I had. And this book is filled with all of my designs, all the same specs, materials, basic outline of construction and tools, a really basic sketch. And that's all there is to it. So, you know, don't get too tripped up in thinking that you need to have some elaborate design process. You don't. You just need to find a system that works for you. And this is what's worked for me through the years. And it still works for me. You know, even now that I'm writing tutorials, this is all I need to get started. And then as I start putting the tutorials together, everything just flows because by that point I've made these pieces enough that it's pretty easy to just go through and bam, 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 outline those steps really quickly. So that's it. This is the Door 44 Design Bible. How do you like that? Pretty simple, huh? Okay, now let's talk about the materials that you're going to need to make the Fleur de Lis earrings. This earring here, this is the original Fleur de Lis earring that I made. This is what you're going to see in the PDF tutorial if you've already downloaded that. If you haven't downloaded it, there will be a link below. You can download that tutorial for free for this particular make-along. And this is the one that I used. This was the original that I made. The only reason we're not doing that for this video is because I ran out of these topaz bicones. I only have one left. So I'm going to switch it up a little bit. And we're going to make this Fleur de Lis earring today in the video. And this is essentially the same. The only thing I changed is instead of a 4mm bicone, I'm using a 3x4mm crystal rondelle. This crystal briolet is the same size as the ones on the original. So nothing's really changing there. They're just switching up the beads a little bit. And the nice thing about this design is you can use any beads that you like. Anything up to about a 6mm accent bead will work here. And the briolets, you can go crazy with the briolets. This is an 11mm long briolet. This is a pretty typical size that you can find almost anywhere. I've used 15mm. I've used large teardrop stones, and I'll show you those later in the variations when we talk about variations of this tutorial. But yeah, so super easy beads to find. So the only materials you're going to need is you'll need a foot of 16 gauge wire. And as you can see, I'm just about out of this spool. I have another brand new spool sitting there waiting to start. This is dead soft 16 gauge wire, and I order all of my wire almost exclusively from Rio Grande. Again, I'll provide links to all the material sources for this tutorial. You'll also need about 5 feet of 28 gauge dead soft wire in the same alloy or a compatible alloy if you're doing, you know, if you're combining metals. Just make sure they're compatible. And then you're going to need a couple of briolettes. Again, these are 11 millimeters. You can use almost any size you like. This frame is really adaptable, so you can fit a lot of different beads there. And then I'm using these 3 by 4 millimeter crystal rondelles. Super simple. And then the last thing you're going to need, of course, is a pair of ear wires. I'm going to be using these Flourish ear wires. There's a free tutorial for these ear wires on my blog. Again, I'll link to that below. So yeah, that's it. That's all you need to get started. I've just got some 28 gauge wire here on this bobbin. I use these bobbins all the time for weaving. And we're not gonna need a bobbin for this project because we're only working with very short lengths of wire. But these are also very handy. So again, all the materials, tools, everything will be linked at the bottom of this page, and there's also a resource page on my blog that I'll also link to, so you can get everything you need to make these earrings. Okay, let's talk about the tools that you're going to need for this tutorial. All the tools, of course, are listed on the tutorial. Again, you can download that for free. Just look for the link below. And we're going to start with the basic tools. You're going to need a lot of these tools for almost every wirework project that you do. Some of these are in my 8 essential tools list, and that also is linked on the blog. So you're going to need a pair of wire cutters. And I use Super Flush cutters from their Swanstrom brand cutters. They're sort of a professional grade tool. These pliers are Swanstrom also. You don't need pro grade tools. You can start really basic with just a set of basic jewelry making tools that you can buy at your local craft store. You can buy on Amazon. Don't go out and spend a ton of money on tools until you know that you're going to be doing this for a really long time. The next thing we're going to need is a pair of flat nose pliers, and these are used to fold wire, which is one of the key elements in this design. We're going to do a couple of folds, and flat nose pliers just help you get nice, clean folds in your wire. So these tools are definitely necessary for this project. These are nylon jaw pliers, and these are optional for this particular tutorial. I used these the first couple of times I made the earrings, and then I haven't used them since. They do help you grip your wire. They'll allow you to kind of hang on to things without marring your wires. So nylon jaw pliers are a really useful tool to have, and they're something that you'll use frequently even if you don't use them in this particular tutorial. These are stepped bail making pliers, and this is a tool that I consider essential. I use these pliers on almost every piece of jewelry that I make. They save me time, they improve consistency, they allow you to create evenly shaped curves and curls and loops. It's just a really great tool, definitely worth investing in. So I highly recommend adding these tools to your kit if you don't already have some. They are one of my 8 essential tools for sure. Next thing you're going to need is a needle file. We're going to use these to shape our wire and sort of refine the lines of our wire frame. This is a kit that I've had. I probably bought these needle files before I even started making wire jewelry. I think this is something I pulled out of my just general household tools kit when I did start making jewelry. This is a really great set that I picked up at Lowe's probably 15 years ago. I haven't been able to find a set that has a removable handle like this since then, and I keep looking, and if I do find one, I'll link it for you guys. In the meantime, I have linked to some sources for needle files. These are really, really helpful for making wire jewelry. It's something you're going to use a lot if you start, doing a lot of Door 44 tutorials. So again, another essential tool that I kind of advise investing in. And of course, you're going to need a bench block and a chasing hammer. Now, I hammer almost all of my jewelry designs involve hammering, and I do that for a couple of reasons. One, I like the look of it. It allows me to create some dimension and depth and just add some interest to my designs. But it also allows me to strengthen the designs. Hammering work hardens your wire, and the harder your wire is, the better it's going to hold its shape over time, the more durable it's going to be long term. So this bench block has a rubber base. I am an apartment dweller, and I do my best to minimize noise and be a good neighbor. This bench block has been a game changer for me. This rubber base does help deaden sound quite a bit, and I've learned another trick that I'm going to show you later on when we're actually using the bench block. Another trick for even deadening sound even more. So for those of you who are apartment dwellers and you're concerned about disturbing your neighbors, I've got a trick for you, so stay with me. All right, the last couple things we're going to need, of course, you will always need a ruler and a fine point permanent marker. This scale I've had since I was in high school. This thing is literally 30 years old. So yeah, just grab what you have around the house, grab what your kids have. You don't need anything fancy. You don't need anything special. I've got a couple of stainless steel rules that I use as well. But this is my go-to. This is what I reach for when I'm actually making jewelry. And then the last thing we're going to need is 3 different grades of sandpaper. I recommend 800, 1500, and 2000 grit. So this is going to allow us to really smooth and shape and polish and refine our wire frames before we add the beads. And this is a thing that, a lot of my readers have pointed out that nobody teaches finishing. And I realize that that's because finishing is something that actually happens. It doesn't happen at the end. It's not that you make the piece and then you finish it. Finishing is an ongoing process that you do throughout the process of making jewelry. And I think a lot of tutorial writers just don't include it, partly because it seems kind of boring. It's tedious, it takes a long time, and it's not particularly technical. So it's one of those things that we just kind of tend to overlook because we're so focused on teaching you the basics of assembling a piece. So, in response to my readers, I realized that we really are doing a disservice to people by not showing the entire process. So we're gonna do lots of sanding in this tutorial, and you're gonna find out exactly how I approach finishing, and you're gonna also find out that finishing is actually something that I start with. It's not something I finish with. So you'll need some sandpaper. This is wet dry sandpaper. It's designed for the automotive industry. Again, I've provided links below. You can use any kind of sandpaper that's suitable for metal. There are a lot of papers out there that at your local hardware store that you can get that work on both wood and metal. Those are fine as long as you can get, fine enough grits that you're going to get a good polish, a good finish on your stuff. And then the last thing, well, there's 2 more things here. These are sanding sticks. This is something I also use. This comes in an assorted pack from 400 grit to 3000. I buy these at Rio Grande. And again, these are all linked on the materials and tools resource page. So you'll be able to shop for everything that you see here. I send you directly to the same stuff that I use. And then the last thing you're going to need is a 10 millimeter mandrel of some sort. Now, notice that I'm using a knitting needle. Again, use what you have. I had a bunch of knitting needles that were my grandmother's. I've had them forever. For many years, they stood around in a tin looking decorative because I never have learned to knit. But they make wonderful jewelry mandrels. I use them all the time now. You know, since I started making jewelry, they've been put to really good use. So again, use what you have. A 10 millimeter wooden dowel will work. Knitting needles, pens, pencils, whatever you can find. Don't feel like you have to go out and buy special tools for this kind of thing, because you really don't. All right, those are all the tools that we're going to need to get started. And now we'll actually get down to making these earrings. Okay, to make our earrings, we're going to start with two 6-inch pieces of 16 gauge wire. You can use dead soft, half hard. I'm using dead soft, and that's usually what I recommend. 16 gauge wire is pretty stiff on its own. So yeah, half hard wire might be a little bit difficult to work with, but if that's all you have, you can use it by all means. And if it gets too hard, you can always anneal it. So we're going to make two 6-inch pieces. Cut two 6-inch pieces of wire here. And then we're going to go ahead and mark the center of those wires, which I'm going to have to do backwards to the way I normally do it since I'm on camera. So yeah, this doesn't have to be super perfect yet. We are going to trim these frames at one point here soon, so we just basically want to, we want to sort of be in the middle. So mark your wires at 3 inches, and then you're going to take your flat nose pliers, and we're going to fold both of these wires in half. So the way that I do my folds, you can see that I position my wires just a little bit to the left of the mark. Now, I'm left-handed, so everything you see here, I'm working as a lefty. Do what's most comfortable for you. If you're right-handed, you're probably more likely to position your wires on the other side of that line. That's fine. Our goal here is we just want to be far enough from that mark that when we begin the fold, and to do the fold, you're just going to push with your thumb. So we've pushed that into a 90-degree angle. And can you see there how that mark is exactly on the point of the curve? That's what we're after. So to work your folds, you just want to start with that 90 degree, and then we're going to just keep pushing this closed, and we're going to work back and forth from one side of the wire to the other. And this helps just get your fold centered, so you don't end up with, one side that's a little more curved than the other, which is something that'll happen if you just keep your wire in one position and then complete the fold all the way. So we're not going to fold these, we're not going to squeeze this fold shut, I should say. We want to leave a little bit of a curve there for the ear wire to sit in. So we don't want a super sharp bend in this case. But I am going to press this closed just a little bit more. Let's see here. Just about there. So that, you can see that these arms of the wire are parallel, but there's still enough of a bend there that we're going to be able to fit our ear wires in there pretty comfortably. Okay, so just go ahead and repeat that on your second wire. Again, we're going to position just a little bit to one side of that line, push with our thumb, and then work back and forth, and slowly work your wire closed into a fold. And then once you get there, we're going to squeeze that closed just a bit. There we go. And that's it. That's the first step of our process. Now that you've folded your wire, we're going to open the fold. So to do this, just get that folded portion between your two index fingers and stretch it out a bit. Try to keep it even. Try to keep the arms coming out level. You can push it against your table surface to kind of get it nice and even. And this is the shape that we're going for. So we want those legs back on a straight plane, and we're just going to have that peak sticking up there in the middle. Repeat that on the other frame wire. Again, use your fingers to get those curves right there at the peak. Press it down, work it onto your table, straighten those arms. And you should have two pieces that are pretty much identical. You can see there's just the tiniest bit of difference between them, but that's okay. We're making handmade jewelry here. We're not looking for, precision machinery. This is handmade art, so it's not going to be perfect. All right, next step. You want to position your two wires on your 10mm mandrel. Again, I'm using a knitting needle. Okay, so just get that centered on your mandrel and then bend those wires around. And you want to go all the way around so that they cross in the middle. And try to keep everything together neatly. You can see that I've folded both wires, across past each other. And now I'm just going to use my thumbnail to bend that wire back. I'm going to flip this over. And again, repeat, thumbnail, bend that wire back. And that gives us our basic bulb shape for the Fleur de Lis. And that's it. Next thing we're going to do is trim these up, get everything nice and straight, and then we'll finish making these frames. Okay, so now we're going to trim up our frames, and let's just talk about a couple of things here. So the first thing to notice is, we formed both of these together, and you can see that they're not perfectly symmetrical. This side here doesn't have quite as deep a bend as this side. We're going to work that to our advantage, and we're going to flip one of these over so that as we're making our earrings, they're a perfect mirror image of one another. So keep that in mind. If you have a little bit of asymmetry and you're making earrings, don't worry about it. Just flip one of your pieces over and you've got perfect mirror image earrings. Now the trick becomes sort of keeping track of that as you're working on these. So we'll talk about that more in this video. But yeah, I hear a lot of people get sort of wrapped up about earring symmetry, and I'm one of those people that really likes my stuff to be mirrored, my earrings to be perfectly mirrored. It doesn't really matter. It's strictly a personal preference. I'm one of those people that'll take the time to do it. A lot of people, especially production-minded people, you're somebody who makes jewelry for a living and you've got to make a lot of it and sell a lot of it. Maybe it's not as important to you. So yeah, total personal preference, but that's the way you do it. If and that's one of the advantages of forming these frames together at the same time, is you allow yourself to create that symmetry, and you're able to mirror things really easily. If they were formed at the same time on the same mandrel, with all of the same bends, that's a really easy thing to do for earrings. All right, next thing we're going to talk about. So you can see here that obviously our bend wasn't very, again, because this bend is a little bit deeper, we ended up with a mismatch here on our wire ends. Now, this is also a really good opportunity to look at how the ends look as they're cut. So the thing about wire cutters, almost all wire cutters are going to leave a bevel of some degree or another. Now these are super flush cutters, so you look at the back of my pliers and you can see that it's almost completely flat. There's very little bevel here in the back. So when I cut my wire, you can see there's a little bit of a lip there in the center where the jaws meet and the wire's pinched off, but you can see how flush that is. Now this other side, obviously, was cut with this side of the pliers, so that's why you get that sharper point there. And this is one of those things about professional grade tools that will save you time and work. So before I bought these super flush cutters, I used these wire cutters for many, many years, and you can see, so this is the more flush side, but you can see that there's a bevel there. So these leave quite a bit sharper end. And then this side is almost essentially the same depth as the others, so you're always going to get a bevel on one side of your cut, regardless of what kind of pliers that you have. And this bevel right here is one of the reasons that I started using needle files so much, as I was frustrated with those ends, and so I got in the habit of always filing off my ends. When I bought super flush cutters, I got away from having to file my ends, and now I use my files for lots of other stuff besides that. So first thing we want to do, we're going to take one of our frames and we're going to trim these ends so that they're even. And again, I'm going to use the flush side of my cutters, and I'm going to position those cutters just past that bevel because I want to trim off that bevel. And use your finger to control your cut off pieces. You don't want wire flying around all over. So there's your cut off ends. And I always just dump those right in my scrap bin so they're not piling up on my bench and ending up on my floor and in my husband's foot, which makes him very angry. Okay, so there we go. We've trimmed the first one. Now we can put our frames back together, kind of gauge our wire here, and we can see trim that piece off. All right, so everything now is the same length, and at this point we're going to go ahead and mark our wires. So I'm going to measure 1.5 inches from the cut end of the wire. Now we're going to place a mark at that point. Excuse me while I try to talk with a pen lid in my mouth. Alright, so again, 1.5 inches from the cut end, and we're going to mark right there. And that's going to be about the point where we're going to fold these frames again to form our final Fleur de Lis shape. Now looking at this, that mark looks a little shallow there to me, so we may have to adjust these earrings a little bit. I think because I got my fold off center, I ended up trimming more off of these frames than I intended to, but we're going to work with that. Again, we're making handmade art here. We're not making precision machinery. So if things come out a little bit imperfect, we'll just adjust and keep going. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to form the curls for the leaves on our frame. And we're going to use our stepped bail making pliers, and we're going to use the second to largest step, which is 8 millimeters on my pliers. These go 2, 3, 4, 6, 8, 9 millimeters. So we're going to use the 8 millimeter mandrel. And the way I like to use these pliers is I grip my wire So it's sort of down in between the jaws of the wire, and I'm gripping right at the tip of the wire. Now we want to position this because we're going to bend our curl on the same plane as this bend. So get your wire situated so that you're bending in that same plane. And then we're going to use our thumb and we're going to roll around and just keep pressing that wire firmly up against the mandrel. And I'm going to go all the way until that wire is pressed up against the 9mm mandrel. So if you look at it here, it's not quite a complete bend. It's maybe a little more than 3/4 of a bend. So you can see how that gap looks right there. All right, that is our first curl for our first leaf. We'll repeat that on the other side. Again, you're going to position your wire just at the tip and grab pretty firmly, and then start rolling. Press with your finger or your thumb. Keep that wire as close to the mandrel as you can as you roll. Come all the way around until your wire shaft is right up against that other step. And again, there we go. You can see that curl is just about the same width. Now notice that there's just a little bit of asymmetry here. One curl is a little bit higher than the other. Part of that is because I'm trying to do things on camera that I normally do with a much better view. So I'm gonna put my mandrel back on that taller piece. So this is the one that's a little bit longer. There's a little bit more of a gap here than there is here. So I'm just going to grab that again and keep rolling until I even that up. And you can see now that they're almost identical. As close as you can get with an eyeball without, really getting crazy about measuring. And again, this is handmade art, folks. We're not making precision machinery. Now, one of the questions that I get asked frequently is, how do you make perfectly round bends? Well, one of the ways I do it is with these pliers. Now, you can't always get in, if you're working on a multi-wire piece and you've already got some weaving and you're working, in tight spaces, you can't always get these pliers in there. So one of the things you can do, let's see if I can find a piece of scrap wire here. I'm just going to cut a piece quickly to demonstrate this. Forming organic weaves is something that's a little bit of a learned process that requires a lot of trial and error. Now, one of the things that I recommend doing is, let's see, let me trim this with my flush side of the cutters so we have a nice flat piece of wire to work with. So you can use, my chain nose pliers have very, very, very sharp tips. So these chain nose pliers will work well for making organic bends. But typically I recommend people use round nose pliers. And the reason for that is round nose pliers, because they're round, they're going to sort of encourage the wire to move in a round line. If you use something with a square jaw, like your chain nose pliers or your flat nose pliers, again, that's going to encourage that wire to move in a straight plane. So round nose pliers help you make round curves. And to make an organic curve, you want to grip the wire as close to the tip as you can, but you want to make sure that you're grabbing it firmly. So don't get so close that you're going to slip off really easily. And then you can just, again, you want to keep your thumb kind of close to the tips of your wires, and you're just going to roll your wrist around and keep on rolling until you get that nice curve. Now notice here that you've got this straight portion. And again, this is typical because you were gripping your wire there. The wire was less inclined to bend. Okay, it's going to sort of resist. And also when you trim wire, you harden it. So those ends get a little bit harder, and hardened wire doesn't bend as easily. And that's often why you get those sort of funky lines on your curves. So again, let's just keep rolling this into a curve. And I'm rolling my wrist. And then, to end up with a nice round curve, all you're going to do is you can hop in there, maybe open that up a little bit. You're going to pop in there with your wire cutters. And again, always position the flush side of your cutter, or the more flush side of your cutter, toward the finished end of your wire. Trim that off. And there you have a nice round organic bend that keeps curving around. So trimming the wire does two things. One, it gets that sort of funky straight end off, and it also removes any tool marks that you might have left with your round nose pliers or your chain nose pliers, whatever you use to make that bend. So again, this is a technique that takes practice. Play around with it. You know, pick up some scrap wire, pull stuff out of your scrap bin, and just experiment and keep working at it. This is one of those techniques that, like I talk about calibrating your grip with your pliers. This is the same sort of thing. It's one of those things that requires many repetitions in order to develop a good feel for it. So there you go. That's how you form an organic curve with your round nose pliers and of course your wire cutters. All right, back to our wire frames for these Fleur de Lis earrings. Again, if you can, if you can use them in a case like this where you can get these pliers in the space that you need, this is an absolute foolproof method of getting those nice, perfectly round curves. And this is frankly my preferred method. I do a lot of organic curves on, a lot of my custom pieces where I'm doing a one-off sort of thing. I will do more forming as I go. For pieces that I design for tutorials, I typically, aim to have a frame that can be shaped all at once before we start doing any weaving or anything like that. So it's a little bit of a different approach. Most of the stuff that I do for my tutorials, I'm able to use these pliers to get all the bends that I need. And when I'm working on other pieces, like the custom clasp that I made recently, that was a piece that, I did a lot of forming as I went, and that required a lot more organic shaping with just my round nose pliers and eyeballing stuff. Whereas this is more of a precise art using the stepped bill making pliers. All right, so let's finish this frame up. We're going to finish forming these curls here. I'm just going to repeat that same process that we used on the first frame. Again, always, always, always use your fingers to keep your wire firmly against the mandrel, and you'll get much cleaner curves. And that one looks pretty good without any adjustments necessary. All right, so our basic frame is essentially complete. But the thing we got to think about now, we're gonna hammer these pieces here. But remember we talked about mirroring and symmetry and getting earrings that are perfect mirrors of one another. So you can see when I marked these, I marked both of them on the same side. So this is not the mirror image that I'm going for. I'm going to have to flip one of these over in order to get that larger curve. Get those facing each other. Probably when I actually finish the earrings, they'll probably be done this way. So at this point, once we start the hammering, this is where it becomes critical for you to decide, are you going to mirror your earrings or not? If you are, you're going to have to start keeping track of the front face of each earring. So one of these earrings, the front face is going to be with the mark, and the other one is going to be the side that's not marked, right? So we flip that one over. This is so important when we start hammering, because the way that you position your piece on your bench block and the way that you hammer it is going to decide how easy this piece is to finish with sandpaper in the second phase of this video, which we'll be tackling in the next video. So keep that in mind. We want one with the mark facing up, and we want one with the mark facing down. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to start hammering these frames. And this is an area, again, I'm an apartment dweller, and even though this block helps deaden sound quite a bit, I'm working on, this is an IKEA desk surface. It's basically a hollow core surface. Essentially, it's like beating on a drum. So even with this rubber base, which does help deaden sound quite a bit, it's still going to be really loud. So I'm going to pause my video here for just a moment, and I'm going to reposition my camera so I can show you how I use this block in order to really, really minimize the sound of hammering. So hold on just a moment. Let me flip the camera around and we'll get that set up. All right. Welcome to the magic of using a solid body for sound deadening. So this is the way that I minimize noise when I'm hammering jewelry. I position my bench block on my thigh and I hammer right there. This really reduces the noise dramatically. It was sort of amazing the first time I did it. I couldn't believe how well it actually worked. So I'm going to go ahead and start hammering this frame. And I'm just going to flatten the tip just a bit. And then I really want to kind of draw these bends out. Sort of kind of add a little bit of dimension and drama to those ends. We're going to flare them a little bit. So to do that, notice that I'm drawing my hammer back as I strike, and I'm pulling that wire toward me. So this is a lot like rolling out dough. I often compare hammering wire to rolling dough. Your chasing hammer has a concave face, or a convex face rather. So there's just a little bit of a curve on this face. And what that does is as it hits the wire, it presses it and pushes it. So it's like literally rolling out dough. You're moving your wire in the direction that you want. So you can draw it toward you, you can push it away from you. And that's one of the reasons that we use this sort of drawing stroke as we use a chasing hammer. So think of it again like rolling dough. And you can see here, let me get this in focus here. I'm trying to look at this upside down. So yeah, it just, you can kind of pull your wire in whatever direction you want it to flow. There we go. That gives you a sense there. All right, so here's the other trick to these earrings. The finished side that we're going to want to sand is the side that was against the face of your bench block. That's the nice flat face. So notice this side is really flat and there's no tool marks on it. Flip it over and look at this side and you can see how that sort of catches the light. There's some tool marks there, and that's because we were using that convex surface and it creates some very light but still very visible tool marks. So this is the side that we're going to want to be the front side of our earring frame. Now remember, we're going to fold these earrings in half essentially. So what you see as the front here is going to end up being the back of your leaves. So this is where you have to really pay attention to how you're positioning your frame on your bench block as you do your hammering. And this is all part of the finishing process. So remember, I talked about finishing being something that we do all the way through. This is one of those things that you kind of have to strategically plan and think about as you're hammering and as you're preparing your frames. You want to think about which surface is going to be facing which direction and which surface you're going to want to finish. So this will become the front side of our earrings. So that means this surface is going to become the back side of our earrings. So we're going to want to place this surface down on our bench block. And again, we're going to hammer those ends, draw them out, kind of form that pretty dimensional leaf shape. And then we're going to turn that around, repeat on the other side. Okay, so again, you can see that we're going to have some tool marks there. You can kind of see those lines there. That's, again, this is going to be the back side. So this is the front side of our frame. And then this back side, nice and flat. So we're going to be able to get that sanded and polished and looking pretty clean. You can see there's a little bit of a tool mark there, and part of that's just, you know, the nature of hammering, but it's far less pronounced on this side than it is on this side. So this is going to be the easier side to sand. All right, so now you got to think about when you're working on your second frame. Again, you got to look at this. So this is the front side of this frame. We started with the mark facing up. For the front side of this frame, we're going to want our mark facing down, but this is the mirror image, the original mirror image. So this surface is the one that we want going against our bench block in this case. So again, position your frame, hammer your wire. And then we're going to flip it over because again we want these sides are going to be opposite. We want the front of this bulb is the back of these leaves. I'm going to go ahead and hammer those out. That last video clip ended a little abruptly. I do apologize for that. Please excuse me while I figure out this video production and editing thing on the fly. Anyway, here are our wire frames for our Fleur de Lis earrings. We finished hammering, we finished forming. The next step is to begin refining these frames. We're going to trim, do some filing, lots of sanding, and then we're going to fold them into their final shape. And that's all going to happen in the next make-along video, which will be released next week. I do hope you enjoyed this video so far. I hope you're having fun with this make-along. I know I am. and I look forward to seeing you again next week. In the meantime, be sure to hit that subscribe button and click on the bell so that you'll be notified when new tutorials become available. And thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a lot of fun.